Real quick, I have to do a variety of disclaimers, okay? Everything that is in this PowerPoint is public source information. It's all cited. There's websites and everything. You have handouts. I think we put the handouts. That's unclassified, so everything in here is unclassified. That's unclassified from the FBI. It's their current take on Chinese cyber espionage and Chinese intellectual property theft. As you may be aware, and the President, the Chinese just slapped $75 billion in reverse tariffs today. We're in, if you don't think we're in a war with China right now, you got another thing coming, because it's across all the fields. So I do opioids and fentanyl. I'm currently General Counsel, National Sheriff's Association. When I was at DOJ, I had the Civil Rights Division. I was Assistant Attorney General, worked right under Rod Rosenstein and Attorney General Sessions. And then when I was working with Secretary DeVos, I had the School Safety in the White House Task Force on School Safety. Also had the China Initiative, the education piece of the China Initiative, and I'll talk about some of that today. What I want to talk about a little bit, I'm going to do kind of two pieces, and I'll tell you one quick story between the difference between the Russians and the Chinese, all right, and particularly kind of their espionage and their approach to the world. Okay, you guys know what Interpol is, right? So Interpol, the executive director of Interpol was a mainland Chinese individual. The member countries, all of them, which include China, Russia, a variety of states that you might view as with different goals and guidelines than the United States has. Interpol, those are all Interpol members. And there's kind of a east-west fight when they elect the Interpol president. So a mainland Chinese individual was elected director of Interpol. China had some concerns about him. He was living in Interpol's headquarters in Europe. He had moved his family out there. They called him back for consultation. Was never heard from again. He disappeared. After about 6 months, Interpol was in a position of, well, I guess we have to elect a new director. This time it came down to a Russian candidate, former KGB, and a United States-backed candidate, kind of a Western-backed candidate, South Korean. Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, DOJ has Interpol, the Interpol division and relationship with Interpol. They went over there. They had burner phones. The phones were hacked. No surprise, if any of you go overseas, there's a whole set of guidelines about what you take and how you take and what happens when you go overseas. But this is the Russians. The Russians were certain their candidate was going to win, so they had their phones play the Russian national anthem and show pictures of the Kremlin. Russians are in your face about what they do, what they take, and how they do it, okay? We can talk about WannaCry, we can go through all those things, but that's the Russian approach. Chinese approach. The Russian approach is a more immediate approach. Chinese approach is 25 years from now. If the Chinese get into your systems, you're never going to find out, okay, unless somebody else finds out. They're not going to show off, they're not going to do it. They're going to be there, and they're going to be there for a year or 2 years or 3 years. All right, and if you look at some of these, and I'll talk about some of the technology thefts. The Chinese are very methodical about what they're taking, what they're going for, and they're not particularly secret. Mark was talking about 5-year plans. Chinese operate on 5- and 10-year plans. They tell us what they're going to do, and so that's some of the slides I'm going to go through. I'm going to start with kind of Russia because that's kind of hot and heavy, particularly and I'm going to focus kind of on the campaign issue and what they do, how the Russians approach things and their methodology. They're not looking for technology, they're looking for geopolitical advantages. So going through this, kind of the 3 cyber challenges: identifying and countering malign influence, foreign influence operations, sophisticated cyber screens. So basically, A is Russia, B is China. Countering hostile foreign states, theft of technology. Unfortunately, Rear Admiral Gene Price, those are his slides, so you'll recognize those slides. And he's a tech geek. He headed up Cyber Command, number 2 in Navy Cyber Command based out of Fort Meade. And then, as Alan mentioned, he was just came off running the entire Navy intelligence operation, reporting to the DNI, a former boss of mine, Dan Coates. Indiana people are everywhere. It's what happens when Chris Christie screws us up the transition and Mike Pence takes over the transition. I was Mike Pence's counsel for 7 years as well. So it's kind of how I got involved in some of this stuff. All right, this is the disclaimer. It's on there. Sole source, all source materials are in the slides, so you'll see them. Russian hacking, everybody's familiar with kind of generally what happened. what I want to talk about a little bit is back what we saw happen in 2016, what we saw happen in 2018, and what you're probably going to see happen, and a lot more of it in 2020 in terms of what the Russians are trying to do. The Russians have made this, they've always tried, what the Russians want to do is they want to influence us. They want to use, and particularly technology, to influence what we do, how we do it, how we think, and to be perfectly honest, they simply want to disrupt. They're not picking a side. They just want us to be unable to operate because we're fighting with each other, okay? That's what we call the foreign influence piece. In this case, so what Russians have done, and we have a complete model of what they've done in Europe. They've done the same thing in Europe, and they use technology, cyber attacks, et cetera, as they do this. They exploit free and independent media spaces and open democracies to conduct active measures in Europe, and they've done it for a long time. The efforts in the US, particularly in the cyber region, using the botnets, everything else is a more recent, and really into the 2016 election, 2018, and we'll see huge, the assumption is we'll see a huge effort in 2020. DHS is talking about everybody standing up. The DNI just said, Director of National Intelligence, just indicated they're going to have an election thing. My expertise is in elections as well. I was on the Indiana Election Commission. I chaired that, so I was involved in all of that, and then I've been on probably 30 or 40 campaigns. Russia conducts increasingly aggressive cyber operations against European governments, a tactic that will continue, and I think something, again, this is what they've done in Europe over the last 8 to 10 years, and now we're seeing it in the United States with Putin being more aggressive. They target disaffected European populations, exploit social, political, and racial divisions in an effort to sow discord, encourage unrest, and incite protests. Their goal isn't to steal anything. Their goal is to make us as a country unable to operate. And they've been doing it in Europe for the last 10 years, and now they're bringing it over here. Election interference. So there are two main ways that they handle election interference in the democratic process. One is foreign influence operations. Okay, so this is kind of botnets and things. We'll talk about that. Two is direct attacks on election infrastructure. The way the United States is set up, you have a federal election structure, but really the elections are run locally, and that's great, having run local elections, because to be honest, our technology isn't that great, and because of that, it's actually very hard to hack our technology. Because it's backwards. We're going into a lot of, you'll see a lot of stuff about paper trails and everything else as we move into particularly the 2020 election. Potential targets of election influence. So number one, you can deal with voter influence. You can hack campaigns. You can hack political entities. You can hack infrastructure, kind of the two main ones, and we'll talk about this in 2016. You saw there was a DNC hack, of course, which has been linked to the Russians. Which is political entity. There was also campaign hacks, releases of emails, WikiLeaks, et cetera. So malign foreign influence operations, again, Russian, I mostly put this slide because I like the Robbie the Robot picture. But what they would do, you know, they're running particular hashtags, they're emphasizing, and what they're doing is they're just acting as a massive echo chamber to disaffected elements in the society. So they see something, they pick it up, they will push the narrative. It isn't a Republican or Democratic narrative, it's a narrative that disrupts the country itself. It's a narrative to disrupt what we do and force us into fighting among ourselves, to be perfectly honest. Again, what's the goal? Spread disinformation, sow discord on a mass scale. And again, they don't care who wins. They just want to make sure that whoever does win isn't going to be able to operate. Okay? They're going to be fighting with investigations and everything. And we just have to deal with that. And whether it's Trump or Hillary, they didn't care about Trump or Hillary. Either one of them was going to be totally hamstrung coming in. Okay? If it was Trump, you saw what happened the last couple of years. If it was Hillary, it was going to be the hacked server. It was going to be the top security stuff. Either one was going to be hacked. And with you look at our political climate right now, I'm not saying it's all Russia. I mean, our political climate is toxic right now, and they're just acting as an echo chamber solely because they don't want us to operate. They want us fighting with each other. We're fighting with each other. We don't look at what's happening in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, et cetera, as they're making encroachments. I mean, if I'm Russia, that's a good strategy, right? Okay, so what happened in 2016? This is the DNI report, Director of National Intelligence. They studied what happened in 2016, and they said Russia has a long-standing desire to undermine the U.S.-led liberal democratic order. They had activities demonstrate a significant escalation in directness. That means they weren't really even hiding what they were doing, okay? Level of activity and scope of effort compared to previous operations. They really ramped it up in 2016. We saw an increased ramp in 2018, but of course with 2020 being a presidential, it's going to be incredible. Again, long-standing Russian messaging strategy blends covert intelligence operations such as cyber activity with overt operation by Russian government agencies and the use of trolls. This is the scary thing that happened in 2018, okay? And whatever you think of Roy Moore, you guys know who Roy Moore is, the guy that was running for Congress in Alabama, an odd individual. If you remember, there was an allegation that he had an inappropriate relationship with a young girl some 30 years earlier. Okay, well what it turned out is, and again this isn't partisan because I think we're going to see both sides do this in the next cycle, unfortunately, it turned out there were Democratic operatives that decided to use the Russian model involving botnets and stories to run this in that he was being supported by Russians, by the Russian botnets. They took the influence that the Russians were going, they said, well, they're all supporting him, and then they set up their own botnets that looked like Russian botnets and pointed it out to people, and the press ran with the story that these were Russian botnets. It came to light, and yeah, I give the credit to the New York Times for really focusing a spotlight on it. That's terrifying. All right, it's bad enough we've got the Russians disrupting our campaign activity, but then we've got the parties pretending to be Russians or other people pretending to be Russians. It means you can't believe anything. I mean, but that's what they want. It's all documented. New York Times has done a really, really good job investigative reporting on this particular situation. It's not particularly illegal, okay? It's just a really bad thing. And so that's what happened in that situation, but more importantly, it's out there, it's a model, and you're going to see these dark PACs and things like that, the supposedly unaffiliated PACs, they're going to use it on both sides. You'll probably start seeing it in the Democratic primary when they really start getting rolling. You're going to see it, and then you'll probably see it in the general election campaign as well. We got that one. Okay, this is in here more for your own information, but this is the DOJ framework to combat malign foreign influence operations. It's what the DOJ, FBI, what they're doing, how they're trying to do it, and the considerations, so it's the model they're using. All right, Chinese influence operations, and I talked a little bit about the difference between Russians and Chinese, okay? I'm going to take a moment. Do you guys know what Confucius Institutes are? Look them up. Okay, Confucius Institutes appear on most college campuses. The colleges love it. Why? They come on campus, they are paid for by the Chinese government, they're viewed as an outreach operation from the Chinese government. If you're a college campus, you can have, do you guys have one on University of Florida? Okay. I strongly encourage you to go take a look at the Senate Intelligence Committee testimony, but on these Confucius Institutes, basically, the colleges like it because they get the kid, they're almost an adjunct to the university. The kids can take classes there, they can learn about China, they can take Chinese language classes. The problem? Totally run by the Chinese government. They're a front for the Chinese government. All right. Senate Intelligence Committee in March held detailed testimony on it. Our the Deputy Secretary, Mick Zayas, former two-star general, Pentagon war planner, spoke on behalf of the Department of Education about the dangers of the Confucius Institute. A number of universities have severed ties. There is no university control over the Confucius Institute, and the Chinese government restricts all speech by the people, both in the classrooms, by the teachers and everything else. There's also an issue about the money that's being taken by the universities on behalf of the Confucius Institute because they're coming from a foreign government. Universities have to report anything over $250,000, and about 90% of the universities are not reporting it. So they're violating those reporting regulations on gifts from foreign governments. It's a big deal, heads up on that. But that's how China has attempted to influence, and these Confucius Institutes are moving down into the K-12 level, particularly high schools, as kind of friendship societies. The Russians actually did this in the 50s. If you go back, the Russians did it early on. So it's what China's doing. But China's different. China's very subtle about what they do. Again, DNI Coates, talking about Chinese government. They're actively targeting, in this case, U.S. state and local governments and officials, trying to exploit any divisions between federal and local levels on policy. What they're looking to do is take our political divisions and play us against ourselves, so they'll find a state like California. They'll amplify what California's position is on this versus what the federal government's position is on this. They'll do it with local governments. They'll look at local governments on tariffs. It's a Chinese government here acting directly both financially, not just in the cyber sphere, but through direct operations as well. As he said, nation faces a continuing threat, both traditional and asymmetric, from hostile foreign intelligence agencies, traditional espionage, often characterized by career foreign intelligence officers acting as diplomats or ordinary citizens, and asymmetric espionage, typically carried out by students, researchers, and business people operating front companies. When you have, and Mark, you mentioned this, that the University of Florida is looking, your angel investors and the companies coming in, you guys are looking very, very carefully at those, right? So when you have companies come in, the Chinese will use, it's very common for them to use front companies. You can go through the US debarment list, and I've been involved in this. You'll see a company that's debarred. 2 days later, same people, same thing. The only thing is the letterhead's changed. The name has changed from A to B, trying to get off the debarment list. All right, you've got to be very, very careful with these, because if you have a foreign investor come in, a Chinese investor or something, there's a lot of legal restrictions. There's ITAR. There's, particularly if you're looking for the defense, you're looking in the energy space, you're looking at some of this controlled space, there's a lot of restrictions that come if you're involved with these foreign companies. China's perspective, and this is where China's coming from. This is the Rear Admiral, Deputy Head of Chinese Academy of Military Science in 2018, late 2018. He said there were 5 cornerstones of the United States system open to exploitation: military, money, talent, voting system, and their fear of adversaries. Okay? He said this is one of their senior leading people. China should use its strength to attack the enemy's shortcomings, attack wherever the enemy is afraid of being hit and wherever the enemy is weak. All right, this slide I put in because my son is a Navy pilot. He flies an E-2D Hawkeye. This is what this gentleman said. The United States fears the most is taking losses. This is several months ago, okay? He said the loss of one supercarrier would cost the U.S. the lives of 5,000 servicemen and women. Sinking 2 would double that toll. We'll see how frightened it is. He gave that speech overseas, okay? All right, so China. Let's talk about China. China trade practices. Are you familiar with how China handles JVs, joint ventures in China? Okay. If you want to do business in China, you have to be affiliated. You have to do it as part of a joint venture with a Chinese company. A requirement of your joint venture is that you turn over all your technology to that Chinese company. Guess what they do? Sun Microsystems got totally hosed on this. That company will then take your technology and they will then sell it to somebody else, or just begin to openly compete against you. They may just patent your, and Sun Microsystems, I believe, had it where they took their microchip, patented their microchip, and then sued them for patent infringement in China. Okay? That's what Chinese does, and we'll talk about the JVs a little bit. But China's cyber theft of commercially sensitive information often takes place in industries that the Chinese government has prioritized for state support, and the victims often operate in U.S. industries that are already suffering from the result of China's other policy tools. China's cyber activities targeting U.S. companies poses significant costs on U.S. companies and burdens U.S. commerce. What he's saying is they're going after all our technology and they're stealing our technology. If you look at China's growth, okay, and I don't think it's in there, but the FBI has this as one of their PowerPoint slides. Since they began a coordinated approach towards cyber theft, towards espionage of U.S., and it's not just us, I'll talk about the EU, that they're stealing their technology too. Their growth has been hockey stick growth. It went like this, and suddenly it goes straight up, okay? That doesn't account. You look at their GDP, you look at their new products, you look at their patents, you look at all their growth. There's nothing that accounts for that, according to the FBI, other than this cyber espionage. All the stuff that you guys are doing so great, that Mark is incubating, all these great ideas, they're looking to come get it, okay? And then they're not secret about it. We'll talk about it. They have a 2025 plan about what they're going to do, and they tell us exactly what industries they're going to look at. So, Chinese hacking for commercial purposes. I put this in because this involved Airbus, okay? They were hacking the Europeans and their jet engines. So for 2025, JSSD is the Chinese government, okay? These aren't private hackers, okay? Understand that. The intelligence officers and a team of hackers focused on the theft of the underlying turbofan engine used in US and European commercial airliners. All right, this was developed between a French aerospace manufacturer. This is a press release. Everything in here is press releases, okay, from DOJ, but it's Airbus, okay? The members of the conspiracy, assist-enabled by JSSD, recruited. That means the Chinese intelligence operation went in and recruited insiders within the company to assist their hackers in breaking into the French aerospace manufacturer. They also conducted intrusions into other companies. At the time, curiously enough, a Chinese-owned aerospace company was working to develop a competing airplane, right? They stole the technology. And this isn't conjecture. These people have been prosecuted. The evidence is out there, okay? Now, how do they do it? So Chinese intelligence officers and hackers working at their direction masterminded a series of intrusions, kind of the standard stuff. You guys are tech experts. I'm not a tech expert. Okay, I'm a policy guy, law enforcement. But they used phishing. This is where I really need Gene, because Gene explains these. These watering holes, domain hijacking, okay? That's what they did. But again, it's at the direction of the Chinese government, okay? So you've got a government hacking your stuff. What are their goals? What is it that China wants? Okay, and we talked about the hockey stick. In 2015, China's council said, this is where we want to be in 10 years, okay? And there are 10 strategic advanced technologies. And it identifies what they're going to go after. This is what they want to be world leaders in, okay? Next generation information technology, robotics, automated machines, aircraft and aircraft components, maritime vessels, advanced rail equipment, clean energy vehicles, electrical generation, agricultural machinery, new materials, and biotechnology. Department of Justice. So I was the assistant. There are 20 assistant attorney generals that run the whole department. Like Chris Ray, FBI is one of the component heads. I had civil rights. John has the National Security Division, okay, which prosecutes intellectual property theft, spies, everything else. NSD runs all that. Work closely with the FBI. So the Senate Judiciary Committee on December 12, 2018, if this bothers you at all, please go look at this, okay? Look at the video on this, because it'll scare the crud out of you about what's going on. Hearing on China's non-traditional espionage against the United States, the threat and potential. After discussing the Made in China 2025, John, who has full access to everything, said Made in China 2025 is a roadmap to theft rather than a guidance to innovate. They're telling us what they're going to come steal, okay? There's not a big secret. Other specific targeted technology, underwater drones, GPS systems in agriculture, steel industry, nuclear power plants, solar technology, chemical compounds, hybrid seeds. All right, how much does it take? Mark, do you guys know anybody in the seed industry? It seems odd. Why are they going to steal your newest strain of, it's GMO whatever? Yeah, but that stuff, some of that stuff takes hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. Well, if somebody just walks out of that research facility with those plans, you're just out $500 million in developing that seed, okay? One of the hard parts for me working at the Department of Education was, and I mean this, and it sounds like University of Florida is doing a good job. Some universities are doing a great job in understanding that with researchers, understanding the threats of this, because China uses, there is hacking going on, but a lot of it's what they call non-traditional collectors, okay? That means it's not a spy. It's, they have what's called a talent program. It's discussed in the handout there. They recruit people to come to China. Colleges and universities love the free flow of information. We want to collaborate. We want to work with you in this open environment, okay? And they go over there, okay? And sometimes they get recruited by the Chinese, or they're working for a Chinese company. We talked about what Florida was doing, but a lot of the universities are doing is looking through these front companies. But this talent development program that China is very aggressively pursuing is literally recruiting people, and then they get in, and then they get in a little deeper. And some of it they don't know they're working for the Chinese. Sometimes they do, but that's what's going on. That's how they're getting into this. Again, and the Chinese, in some ways, they're going after everything. It's like this massive grab of everything, because they have the resources, the human resources, to be able to kind of look at everything, okay, and try to wade through it and figure out what they can utilize. And again, it's the Chinese government, okay. This is the manner in which they do it, and the same chart I think is in the FBI one. They use the same one. What they want to do, they use the intelligence services. These are the manners in which they collect information. Intelligence services, legal and regulatory environment. That is to say, we do the JVs, and then we allow them to patent it in China, and then sue you for infringing on their patent of your own technology, okay? Non-traditional detectors, that's typically students, research assistants, okay? The colleges and universities have a lot of foreign students, and that's great. okay? But we just need to be aware that those that have these affiliations, JVs, we talked about how they take them out of the JVs, research partners, academic collaborations, M&A, sometimes they just buy the company, they buy the technology, right? And then it's theirs. All right, and the talent recruitment program is a big deal and a big focus on FBI, and again, it's discussed in the materials from the FBI. These are just the methods of collection I just went through. Now, what's our response? So the DOJ developed what was called the China Initiative, okay? You guys know who Huawei is, right? All right, Huawei was kind of the poster child when they finally said, okay, enough is enough, we're done. Okay, we're going to go after Huawei. It's going to make waves. It's going to hit the 5G. It's across the board. It's the way to really talk about what China's doing and how to combat what China is doing. Again, Attorney General Sessions, Chinese economic espionage against the United States has been increasing and been increasing rapidly. They want the fruits of America's brain power to harvest the seeds of planned economic dominance. I'm not making it up. That's the 2025 plan, right? You can read it. And I think there's a citation of materials if you want to read the 2025 plan. So what are we doing? What's DOJ doing? Identify and prosecute priority trade secret theft cases. So they're going after people. Why is that important? Be careful if you guys got a tech startup, if you've got people in there, they're looking for these cases to prosecute. If you've got somebody that's taking technology, they will work with you, but make sure you vet it. Make sure you watch out. A lot of the control, they're going after controlled technology transfers. Okay, so if you're in an area where you have controlled technology, or you're working on an energy grant, if you're working on that, what are you guys just about to go over $1 billion, right? If you're working on any of those over $1 billion in research, that's one university. All the universities are doing that. If you're working on those projects, be very careful, because those are the targets, and that's, again, those are places DOJ is looking for infiltration. Non-traditional, again, researchers in labs, universities, defense industrial base, educate colleges and universities about potential threats. Foreign Agency Registration Act, unregistered Chinese agents. So what we have, you guys saw, you know Paul Manafort is, right? That's what Manafort got nailed on, right? He was working on behalf of the Ukrainians without registering as a foreign agent. So you get in these situations where we have these front companies, okay, and people, you may not know who you're dealing with, but you may be working with that front company and bringing them to a tech hub or something like that as an angel investor. You don't know that they're a Chinese front company necessarily. If they're a Chinese front company and you are working for them and you're getting paid for that, that means that you are a foreign agent. You're working for a foreign company. All right, you may not even know, but sometimes it's on Wikipedia. I had one, it's Hikvision, okay, H-I-K Vision. Google it. It says, Chinese-owned company that has been debarred. I mean, it wasn't hard, okay, and so take a look at this stuff. You've just got to be careful. Again, what the DOJ is trying to do. Try to address supply chain threats, especially ones impacting telecommunications. This is Huawei, of course. Identify Foreign Corrupt Practice Act cases. So we're trying to go after the Chinese front company. I will stop saying were. I'm a former DOJ. I just feel like I'm still there, but this is DOJ is going after Foreign Corrupt Practices Act involving Chinese companies that compete with American businesses. Okay, which means if they're stealing our technology and then trying to use it to compete with us, that violates the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Look at whether we need additional legislative and administrative authorities. They convened a working group led by Demers that's hitting all those pieces. I had kind of the educational piece of the China Initiative, working with colleges and universities, trying to get them to understand the threat, particularly of the non-traditional collectors coming in. And as you guys are trying to monetize, like Florida, they were talking about how they had monetized all this stuff. How do we keep that from just walking out the door? You spend all this time, all these hubs to monetize it, and then a student, a research assistant, whatever, literally just boxes it up and ships it out, or puts it on a scan drive and sends it out. I mean, some of them are dumb enough to just email stuff. But in any event, there's a working group working on this stuff. Indictments, 2 Chinese hackers associated with, again, the Ministry of State Security. Global computer intrusion campaigns targeting intellectual property and confidential business. This came down in December 2018. Known with the cybersecurity community, the Advanced Persistent Threat 10 group. They worked for a Chinese company called Huang, Haitei Science and Technology Development Company. It's Chinese front company, right, working with the Chinese Ministry of State Services. Between 2006, so for 12 years they were doing this. They conducted global campaigns of computer intrusions targeting, among others, data, intellectual property, confidential business, and technological information. State and non-state actors. You familiar with the Anthem breach? Anthem's based in Indianapolis, had a lot of involvement with that. The indictments just got handed down, okay? 4-count indictment alleges, so all of that, and they indicted 2 people, okay? One was this gentleman. The interesting one is the John Doe, okay? I don't have any inside information. What's interesting is they named this person as John Doe. Generally, that means that that is a Chinese government official, probably military. So it's probably a military hack. All right, you guys remember the OMB hack, the biggest hack? That was Chinese as well. The Chinese in these hacks, they're not looking for intellectual property. They're not looking, these personnel hacks, what they're looking for is information on individuals that they can use to either recruit them, they can use against them. I mean, if you're going into your healthcare information, you may find out you've got an STD, you've got this, you've got that. There's a lot of really interesting information. For those of us who are old, what doomed McGovern's campaign? The release of the fact that he had been treated for mental illness with shock therapy, okay? That was released. That was kind of the end of McGovern's, fair enough? We're old enough to remember that. But that's the kind of stuff they were looking for. That's what they were looking for in the OMB, certainly in the Anthem accounts, okay? So it's not just technology they're looking for. Okay, WannaCry virus. This is one of, I've got some of Gene's slides in here as well, but you know, the NotPetya, these guys, this is kind of what Russia has done in the area. I should have reversed these 2 slides. Other Russian operations, these are hackers, you know, where they've been hacking. The doping stuff, no surprise there, of course, after what happened in Sochi. Okay, they were, I guess they were caught red-handed doping in Sochi, just literally passing samples back and forth through a fake wall, had their own duplicate doping agency. The interesting part is, why would they hack the MH17 plane crash the Malaysian plane crash investigation? That one was always strange to me. Okay. Now, I told you my son was a Navy pilot. This one's, have you guys heard about the F-35? I mean, they stole everything. They stole all the plans and built their own F-35. All right, that thing's a multi-billion-dollar development program, Pentagon development program, and they stole it and built their own. The good news is that it's not like putting together Lego pieces. The answer is they ended up canceling the program. They actually built it, it actually flew, but it didn't really work. So just because you have the specs and the plans, there's the whole specs and plans and there's as-built. So it didn't actually work. But the bad news is that's $4 or $5 billion in stealth technology they just stole. You know, so that's our capital that went in that they took. And that's DOD, okay? They're breaking into DOD and doing that. Imagine what they can do when they're working with small startups, that they're going after your technology. Iranian cyber activity, again, Gene's slide. North Korea is active in there, but theirs are almost all commercial hacks. They're just looking for money. They want to shake people down. That's where North Korea's actions are. Kentucky business. Okay, the last couple of slides are Gene's slides about things that I know very little about. So I kept them in there for information. I think I'm at the tail end of mine. I want to do going dark real quick. Do you guys know what going dark is? Going dark is huge. All right, you're going to hear a lot about going dark. And this slide is in here because I want you to understand this happened beginning in 1997 throughout. This isn't Republican Democratic. Going dark is encryption, end-to-end encryption. Okay, what happened after the Facebook? Zuckerberg's not particularly good testimony, and what a lot of these apps are doing in terms of collecting privacy information and things like that is they're going to end-to-end encryption. WhatsApp is going to end-to-end encryption. What does that mean for those of us? Like I said, I represent General Counsel for National Sheriff's Association, state and local law enforcement, federal law enforcement. It means that we're getting to a point where we can't access that at all. Why does that encryption matter to law enforcement? Let me tell you my experience. So as the Assistant Attorney General, one of my branches was I had human trafficking, sex trafficking, child exploitation. All right, you guys know about the dark web and everything, right? They don't need to use the dark web anymore. We go to end-to-end encryption, we can't get at them. just using WhatsApp. I've dealt with a lot of pedophiles, child pornographers, and if we go to end-to-end encryption, we're not going to be able to get at these guys, all right? Much less, I also had, a Civil Rights Division, I had hate crimes, all right? Do you guys remember all the Jewish threats at the end of, in 2017, all the bomb threats? It was crazy. I mean, Jewish community centers were under siege, all right? I oversaw that, all right? We couldn't get at the technology, okay? It was just really, really tough. As it turned out, the young man that was doing it, he was 19, was an Israeli national. The Israelis got him, and he has not been, I believe there's an extradition request to bring him back. He has not been brought back. But the technology, he was using encrypted technology, and it was very, very, very difficult to get at that stuff. San Bernardino, remember the San Bernardino terrorist attack? The two shooters, they went out in a blaze of glory at the end. Do you remember they couldn't, he had an iPhone, and Apple wouldn't allow them to decrypt his iPhone. The problem for law enforcement is then we don't know whether he has helpers, whether there's a follow-on attack. There's a lot of this. Back to hate crimes, one of the big things for hate crimes, a lot of times, in a murder or killing, you're like, we got the guy, he did it, who really cares why he did it? For hate crimes, we really do care why he did it. The El Paso shooter had a manifesto on there. That's how we prosecute from the federal side, hate crimes, things like that, social media postings, things like that. That tells us it isn't just that I want to shoot somebody, but I want to shoot them because they're this, that, and everything, which allows us to prosecute them under one of the federal hate crimes. If we go dark, okay, we lose all of that. And there's 8,000, there's terrorism, there's mob, et cetera. There's tons of things. The reason it's relevant, again, from 1997 to the present, Attorney General Barr has made it absolutely clear. He gave a speech July 30th that he is going to fight back on the tech companies on the Going Dark initiative, publicly, politically, because it will hamstring our law enforcement completely. He gets, and if you look at his speech, he gets that there's privacy, that there's things like that. They're not demanding necessarily a back door. I mean, look at his speech, okay? I don't want to speak for Attorney General Barr. But he feels very, very strongly. And if there's one thing I've learned about Attorney General Barr versus other attorney generals, he will not take no for an answer. He believes in this, and he's going to push it hard. You will see a lot of movement in this space. For those of you that are actively in the tech space, that's a big deal. All right, I think he's going to work with the tech companies. I think he's going to try to convene that. But I don't think he's going to tolerate law enforcement's ability to investigate these, and particularly, and I'm not talking, secret things. I'm talking about lawful subpoenas that you cannot answer because you cannot encrypt it. Okay, that's what we're talking about. Okay, those sort of things. It's not, under the table things or anything. This is straight out. You've got a subpoena from a court to get the records, and you've got the phone, but you cannot decrypt what's on the phone because they're using 64-bit, whatever the encryption, the top-end encryption stuff is. That's a big deal, and so for those of you who are in that space, it's going to be hot and heavy over the next probably 6 months. He's going to push very, very hard. The administration's going to push hard. I know state and local law enforcement's going to push very, very hard on that because we've got to fight this stuff, and we have to have some tools to do it. I think there'll be a long conversation about what that looks like, but I think it's a subject, if you're not looking at it and you're in the tech space, you really ought to keep an eye on that because there's a lot of movement in that space right now.